Okay, so with that, let's begin with agenda item 1, which is roll call.
Oh shoot, what did I do?
Yes, sir. If everyone could mute their microphones, we would greatly appreciate that. And
Can
I
we
will start.
begin after roll call?
Okay, Tim Andrus.
Here.
Amber Beard. Here. John Byram.
Here.
Kurt Campbell.
Here.
Thank you. Ray Chavez.
Here.
Will Conley. Debbie Farmer.
Here.
Charlie Flatten. Steve Graham.
Here.
Vic Hildebrand. Tom Youngman.
Here.
Thank you. Russell Labus.
Here.
Thank you. Glenn Lord.
Yes, I'm here online.
Thank you. Daniel Meyer. Gary Middleton. Travis Pruski.
Here.
Robert Puente.
Here.
Annalisa Peace
Here.
thank you. Humberto Ramos.
Here.
Weldon Briggs.
Here.
Roland
Here.
No, it's not even.
Diane Savage is online. Darren Simmons.
What? I'm on the screen up here.
Mitchell Summers.
Here.
Adam Yablonsky.
Here.
Thank you. Chair, we have a quorum.
Okay, very fine. We'll move to agenda item 2, public comment. Is there anyone present in the meeting, either online or in person, that would like to make public comment at this point? There'll be an opportunity at the end of the meeting as well to provide comment.
Bring it back on.
I just, the volume.
No,
Any
sir.
indication online that there's public comment?
No, sir. Not this time.
Very fine. We'll move to agenda item 3, communication.
Where do
Before
where do I
Board
speak?
Director Jackson. Oh, yes.
Yes, I mean, if it was unmuted.
Somebody may want to tell her that she's live and we might hear some of the text.
I did that, so. I see.
Do we have the ability to mute online participants? We do. I would want that courtesy.
You have to see what he said.
Yeah, sure. I've been on meetings with him. Yes, we'll move to agenda item 3. Folks, we're fortunate to have Director Jackson here present with us. I'm pleased that, yes ma'am, if you would, go to the podium and make yourself comfortable. We're fortunate to have her so early in the planning cycle. We have many new members, new to the process, so I think it's very timely. And so with that, we'll turn it over to you.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. And, you know, you're the boots on the ground people that are making things happen across Texas. And I tell folks we don't plan to plan, we plan to build. And our success, I think, is grounded in the $9 billion worth of investment that we're seeing ongoing across the state of Texas. And of course, San Antonio has taken great utilization of the resources available for the Texas Water Development Board. And, you know, as I travel around the state, you know, I have to really kind of call out SAWS for the leadership and the way that I think they've approached their future water supplies in terms of looking at it as a system. And I think in terms of the water planning that's ongoing here within your region, I mean, that certainly is a standout in my mind. I'm the engineer on the board. And so, you know, when we talk about the water resources across the state, you know, first off, we think of water in reservoirs, which if you don't use it, you lose it because it you know, the evaporative losses in 2011, for example, in Lake Sam Rayburn, which is the largest lake totally contained within the state of Texas, was 4 times what the community's consumption was. So first strategy out of the box, conservation. That's the most cost-effective water supply that we have, and of course we know that the Riverwalk is reused water, and the efforts that have been ongoing here in this region for water conservation are exemplary across the state. Second, utilizing the surface water, then managing the groundwater, using the resources of desal. Of course, you know, one of the largest desal facilities right here in San Antonio, brackish desal facilities. And then, you know, many other strategies as we look across the state of Texas. The Corpus area is looking at seawater desal and utilizing the resources of the board to move forward with a seawater desal plant. And then, of course, brackish groundwater across the state, and all made possible because of the planning efforts and the work that y'all are doing here. So, you know, Texas is very unique, and I think we should be very proud of the role that local communities take in water planning. It's a bottom-up process in Texas. Nobody tells Texans what to do. And the volunteers that work on our regional water plans do the water planning based on data and science. So the better the data, the better the science, the better the science, the better the policy. And then we also believe in tying financing to water planning. So the projects that are in and moving forward and being financed through the SWIFT are there because they are recommended projects or recommended strategies, very well vetted projects developed by the regional water planning groups. So, you know, lots of excitement ongoing about planning. I think the central message here is that it's working, and all of the efforts that you're putting into it, the time and your talent are really paying off across our state. As kind of leaders in the water community, I wanted to brief you on just a couple of things that are kind of near and dear to my heart. One is that, as you might appreciate, the number of projects that the board has been managing really just since the board was reorganized back in 2014 have doubled. So lots more projects out there. And of course, you know, when we make a commitment and we close the loan, that's really just the beginning. I mean, we have to continue to steward that loan as well as do the work that's needed as we review the documents, as we generate the outlays, and we make sure that the project moving forward stays on time and on budget. So one of the things that the board is actively engaged in and working on, and we've been very fortunate through Chairman Puente and SAWS to provide, you know, some in the field kind of resources to help and kind of advise us, but working on a project management system. And I'm very excited about this because we know that we need to have a dashboard so that everybody internally kind of knows where we are in every step of the way, as well as something that's externally facing so that communities know exactly, you know, where they are in the process. We know the expectations, they know the expectations, and so again, just a tool along with going in and reviewing our processes and procedures and making those available to the owner, to the contractor, to the engineer, and of course internally to the board. So that is one of the major focuses that we're going to have here in the next couple of years. I think it really complements the work that we've done in the application process, as well as the work that we've done in hoping to streamline the water planning, and of course the work that's ongoing with flood planning. We were given by the legislature funding to put, not only to create the very first state flood plan, but also to move forward with some projects that would help to mitigate flood. And so that work is ongoing. The feedback that we get from the flood planning groups is that they are on schedule. And so really look forward to having that as a complement to what Texas needs, because as you know, we are in perpetual drought punctuated by times of flood. The other work effort that we're working on is outreach to rural communities. And as we know, many small communities really kind of lack the water resources that they need, and not just water treatment, but also oftentimes wastewater treatment as well. So that continues to be a focus of the board, as well as providing asset management for small systems. And excited to announce that that will become a program that communities within the next IUP should be able to self-nominate themselves. So exciting times at the board, exciting times across Texas. As you know, in this area, Texas continues to grow. Anywhere from 1,000 to 1,200 people come into Texas every day, probably a lot of them to this area. And of course, nobody bringing any water with them. So just wanted to say thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for the leadership. Please know we were all about continuous improvement, anything and everything we can do to make the process better. We want to do that. So we are always open to your thoughts and ideas. Please call me personally if you have things that you want to recommend. Oftentimes we kind of reach out to y'all to get to kind of benchmark with, if you will, kind of the best of the best. So thanks so much for having me. Thanks for the work that you're doing. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions, or I'll be here for the meeting and can talk with you afterwards.
Very good. Thank you so much. Are there any comments or questions from the meeting participants?
You spoke a little bit about outreach to rural communities. There was that article that came out about, where Texas Water Development Board's goals were versus what we've achieved in outreach to rural communities. And there are a number of systemic reasons for that, but from your perspective on the state, on the state level, are there things that we could be doing at the regional level, approaches we could take for success that you have seen in other regions of the state that would help the Texas Water Development Board achieve those goals?
So, well, first off, I wanted to comment on the actual, report in terms of the metrics. And so that was specific to the SWIFT program, and the 10% goal was 10% of the financing. If you kind of go back and you look at the number of projects that the board has committed since 2014, about half of those were for small communities, and many of them for rural communities. So we're very much utilizing our other programs. We have had some programs within SWIFT. We do know that there continues to be a need in rural communities, and we're kind of taking a look internally of what we need to do to kind of address that. But I think, the direct answer to your question is kind of like right back at you. I mean, if you could please just get the word out. I mean, you interface kind of boots on the ground with these people every day. Just let them know that, the board is available. I'd like to think that one of the successes of the board, particularly in working with small communities, is that we do more than just write the check. So we work very closely with rural communities to kind of help them through the process. Obviously, it's not our money, so we have to make sure that, any kind of loan or loan and grant commitment that we offer to a small community, they're able to kind of pay us back. And the challenge, I think, continues to be the need for kind of three things to be in place. The technology, which quite frankly, I think from a science and engineering standpoint might be the easiest in terms of what is the issue and how to address it, the technology. Secondly, the financial capacity. And then thirdly, the governance. I mean, again, it's a bottom-up process in executing projects, whether it's a big regional project or if it's a small community. And so the local leadership kind of has to take the bull by the horn and say that they want to do it. So as a leader and as somebody who interfaces with small communities, help us to get the word out. I see you recommend agriculture. We specifically asked the ag membership, what can we do to help ag? And they came back and said, go help these small communities because they, without them in place, we're very difficult to do the job that we need to do. So get the word out. Please have them call the board. We have very low interest financing. And of course, as everyone's heard, we've got the additional federal money that's coming. There is a requirement that a lot of that be given out, 49% actually in grant. And so it's going to be, the base funding that we have and then, new day, new opportunity. So, probably never a better time for a rural community to reach out to the board and get the resources that they need to move these water supply and wastewater treatment plant projects forward. But thank you for that question.
Okay, thank you so much. Timely discussion on outreach, I think. But I think we'll be discussing that later today in the meeting, so thank you. We'll move to agenda item 4, approval of minutes of the previous meeting of the planning group. Those minutes were sent out to the membership prior to the meeting in the packet, I believe. So, is there any discussion regarding those minutes? There's an online community chance here. I can't tell if people are wanting to make comment or not. Assuming they're not, is there a motion to approve the minutes as drafted?
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second?
Glenn Lord will second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any opposition to the motion passing? If so, speak up. We'll consider the motion passed. Move to agenda item 5, status report and communication with Texas Water Development Board.
Good morning. Hi, Ron Ellis here from the Regional Water Planning Team of the Texas Water Development Board. I'm just filling in today for Elizabeth McCoy. I've got a few slides to go through. If y'all could go ahead and cue up my first slide, please. Do you all have my slides?
They're not visible yet.
Yes, we do. We are putting them up now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, first of all, in March, we released the draft list of municipal water user groups for the 2026 regional water plans and the historical supporting data for that list. The information was emailed to all the planning group stakeholders, and it's also available online in a dashboard format for review. That dashboard's accessible by the link on that slide. We're requesting that the planning groups review the WUG list and provide any revisions back to us by July 29th. The finalized set of water user groups is what we will use to develop the population and municipal water demand projections for the 2026 regional water plans. Second item, the State Water Implementation Fund for Texas, the SWIFT program. So invitations to submit complete SWIFT applications were recently extended to 2 regional entities that applied for SWIFT funding that submitted abridged applications. Those entities were GBRA and Alliance Regional Water Authority. The complete applications are due May 11th at 5 p.m. And the board will consider funding commitments sometime this summer. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to go over some of the recently adopted changes to regional water planning rules. On April the 11th, our board adopted amendments to chapters 357 and 358 of our rules. Proposed rules were published back in December, and there was a 30-day comment period, which closed at the end of January. So as a result of public comments, 2 of the proposed rule revisions for Chapter 357 were not adopted. We didn't make any changes to the proposed revisions to Chapter. The next few slides will go over some of the key changes to the rules. The board item for the rules is also available at the link in the last bullet on that slide. If you want to see the full details of all of the rule changes and the public comments we got and things like that. So these rules became effective on May 1st. And so they're now available, published on the Secretary of State's website in full. Next slide, please. So the main revisions to Chapter 357, which are the regional water planning rules, there were new requirements added for planning groups to discuss their process for conducting interregional coordination at the pre-planning public input meeting, and then to summarize interregional coordination efforts in the tech memo, initially prepared plan, and the adopted regional water plan. You all have already done that this cycle, but it's just been, adopted into our rules now. Clarification provided that the tech memo include a statement, if applicable, that no infeasible water management strategies or projects were identified by the planning group. So this is related to a bill in 2017, which requires you all starting this cycle to identify infeasible water management strategies, which are water management strategies that are not going to be able to bring water online by their scheduled decade in the regional water plan. So our rules already required, as a result of that bill, for you all to identify these infeasible strategies. But now we've added in there that if there are no infeasible strategies identified, you just have to say that in the tech memo. There's going to be more guidance in our upcoming contract amendments. The new contract guidance will have more information about the whole infeasible water management strategy process, since that's new to y'all this planning cycle. All right. There's also a requirement for planning groups to perform the requirement for planning groups to perform the infrastructure financing analysis was removed. House Bill 1905 in the last legislative session got rid of that requirement. So now there will be 10 chapters to the regional water plan instead of 11. Next slide, please. Also, as a result of House Bill 1905, the requirement to prioritize recommended water management strategy projects has been removed. So you no longer have to do that prioritization and submit that with the regional water plan. So that also, that bill also dissolved what was known as the Uniform Standards Committee, which was the group of representatives from regional water planning groups that set the scoring criteria for prioritization. And the SWIFT rules have also been revised to remove the prioritization as a scoring item. All right, clarification was also provided that specific allowances for certain limited costs associated with delivery of water within a WUG service area after treatment are permissible for direct reuse and conservation strategies. So the rules already allowed for those expenses for conservation. Now we've added direct reuse to that. So, you all, most of you understand that distribution line costs are not eligible expenses in a water supply project. Now some distribution for direct reuse will be an allowable expense for those direct reuse projects. There were also several clarifications made to align the rules more closely with statute and remove some non-statutorily required reporting. These are instances where we generally change the terminology in the rule from shall to may. These were items that weren't required by statute, but you may choose to continue doing them if you wish, but you won't be required to any longer. Additionally, drought response information has been revised to align with statute. Planning groups are required to identify drought response triggers and actions in the region. Previously, the rule required that planning groups had to make recommendations on drought response triggers and actions. You all will still need to compile existing information, but you won't have to put forth recommendations. Next slide, please. So this is related again to the infeasible water management strategies. An allowance has been made in the rules for minor amendments to include an increase in unmet needs or new unmet needs only if the amendment is the result of removing an infeasible water management strategy or a water management strategy project. That minor amendments just couldn't do that before, but now in the case of amending to remove an infeasible water management strategy or project, there can be unmet needs or new unmet needs. Clarification has been provided that the executive administrator will establish a deadline for planning groups to submit those amendments associated with infeasible strategies that might be identified in the 2021 regional water plans, and clarifies that these amendments must include a summary of changes to unmet needs if applicable. And also an allowance is made for planning groups to adopt errata to a final regional water plan to correct minor errors that are identified after the adoption of the plan, but before the adoption of the state water plan. So examples of minor errors or corrections or typos or revisions to address inconsistencies between the regional water plan and the state water planning database. So it's just an opportunity for you all to make minor fixes without having to go back and amend your plan. But it has to happen before the state water plan. Okay, next slide, please. And so for Chapter 358, which is the state water planning rules, clarifications provided that planning groups may, at the discretion of the planning group, plan for drought conditions worse than the drought of record. That's in our guidance principles. This revision, reflects and better accommodates planning efforts by some planning groups to plan beyond the drought of record. We got some preliminary input from stakeholders about this, and we also got input from the last interregional planning council about this. But to be clear, this revision does not require that planning groups plan for drought conditions worse than the drought of record. It only says that you may if you wish. And lastly, the term water management strategy projects is added throughout our guidance principles to align the terminology in the guidance principles with the terminology in the regional water planning rules. That's all I've got. Are there any questions?
Questions from the online participants? Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Appreciate that.
Thank you all very much.
We'll move to agenda item 6, staff reports and communications related to regional water planning, including reports by the chair, regional liaisons, groundwater management area representatives, and members of the planning group. I'll begin with a couple of comments. Again, I want to remind the membership that we continue to have 2 vacancies on the planning group. Electrical generation and water utilities remain vacant. These are vacancies that have persisted for some time. We continue to encourage membership to reach out to individuals and entities that you may know that could nominate an individual for that role. We'd like to fill those seats, the sooner the better, earlier in the planning process. It's a
Do
difficult
we have to
process.
go through a formal process to get them nominated, or how's that?
Yes,
work?
sir. They're, well, formal in the sense that there is a form, not a very significant form, but nonetheless a form, and it has to be submitted to San Antonio River Authority as the administrator. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And I believe we post information on our website that would allow any interested party to review that form such as it is and make the submittal. The requirements to be a member are, very limited. Be able to represent that interest group, of course, abide by the bylaws, and there may be some other minor conditions, but frankly, if you work or have an interest in that area, then you likely could serve, I suppose. There is a process that we typically go through to review those nominated individuals, including interviews and review of applications and supporting data. So for this, let's call it the next meeting cycle, in order to be prepared to present nominations, we would like to see those applications submitted by, we decided June 30 would be an appropriate time frame to allow us to complete the process in preparation for our next quarterly meeting. Another update regarding regional liaisons. In March, we were notified that Lavaca Regional Water Planning Group, or Region P, has nominated Mr. Brzezowski to serve as liaison to this planning group. So I'm not certain if he's present online, but we'll certainly encourage him to participate actively in our meetings in the future. And then my final comment, final comment I have here regarding groundwater management areas. Happy to report groundwater management area 15 has received notice that the DFC and explanatory report submitted in December of last year has been designated administratively complete. So the member districts will begin the next part of the process to put those desired future conditions in place and adopted at the district level. Those are all the comments I have. Are there any other comments from the members, liaisons, or GMA members?
I'd like to invite Mr. Scott Storment to comment if he's available online. He wanted to provide an update on the EAHCP.
Ms. Hayes, he doesn't appear to be online now.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to provide a report?
Tim, this is Diane Wasenick online.
Hello, Diane.
Hi. I attended the Region K meeting last week, and they are in the same early stages as we, so there's not a lot to report. But there was discussion around the changes to agriculture, amounts of water that may be needed to be met, that TWDB did, by adjusting the way they calculate that need. And I assume we're going to probably get into that today for our group. But there was a lot of discussion around it because there were many members that were concerned that the agriculture counties or representatives that are from counties that have a large agricultural need, like down from the coastal area, were not in attendance at the meeting. So they're going to have a committee meeting where they discuss all this. It's quite interesting that some counties have a lot of change in that they will need less water. Some will not change at all. Some will need more water. This is all for agricultural. And I know agriculture has been a discussion among us in Region L, so I'm following that real closely and may report on that later.
Thank you. Excellent. Any other comments? Being none, we'll move to agenda item 7. Discussion and appropriate action to authorize San Antonio River Authority to negotiate and execute an amendment to the Texas Water Development Board contract to incorporate the full scope of work and total project cost for the 2026 regional water plan.
I may need Ron to help me out with this item, but this summer, TWDB is going to release an amendment to the scope of work. And this action item would allow the River Authority to, as the administrator, to negotiate with TWDB to execute that amendment to scope of work and then execute the following contract with Black and Veatch. Correct, Ron?
That's right. The contract amendment will, as you said, have the full scope of work for the 6th cycle, for this cycle. It will also have the full amount of funding for the cycle, and it will raise the committed funds, the amount of funds that's presently committed for Region L for this cycle. We get funding from the legislature on a biennial basis, so we're only able to commit funds to the planning groups, as those funds are available to us. So, finally, the contract amendments will have updated guidance documents, which will, have more information about how to perform some of the tasks in the scope of work.
I believe the action before us is considering making the authorization to allow Sarah to go through that process with TWDB. I believe one of the benefits of doing so, we want to expedite the process, potentially avoid any disruption to our process, certainly to the extent it involves our technical consultants. Is that accurate?
I'll make that motion.
Second motion. Is there a second to the motion? Second. Second to the motion. Is there any additional discussion on the matter? Okay, there being none, is there any opposition to the motion? Comments, I presume online. No opposition, we'll consider the motion passed. Okay. We'll move to agenda item 8, discussion and appropriate action regarding the establishment of subcommittees. This is a, excuse me. This is a standing, it's an agenda item we anticipate being on many, if not all, of the future agendas of Region L. To afford us the opportunity, should we determine there's a need for certain subcommittees to be formed to address or tackle some issue, we can do so. Of course, in the past, we used this to establish the demand work group as a subcommittee of Region L. We'll discuss that further or later in the meeting as we get further into the agenda. However, I think at this point, we're going to take up a request. Mr. Yablonsky, you requested that we consider establishing a work group to consider irrigation or some other topic. You want to speak to that?
Sure, yeah, irrigation and agriculture, as Director Jackson pointed out, it's on us to kind of reach out to our local groups, and we've had an unmet need in this region, at least the last few plans. And so, and we've talked in this group about maybe starting an agricultural subcommittee to look at that. And so I wanted to throw out, keep the momentum for that idea going, to throw out for discussion the idea of establishing a subcommittee to look at agriculture, both irrigation and livestock needs in the region, look at the unmet needs, and Lauren and her group have some in-house expertise in this area in other regions that maybe could shine a light on some of the approaches we could take, some ideas that we could use in our area, and then also just help us improve our outreach to some of the rural communities and look at ways that we could try to meet some of that unmet need either through conservation or drought management or others. But just wanted to throw that idea out for discussion. See what you think.
Did you say there's other regions have these agriculture subcommittees?
That I don't know, but in the in speaking with Lauren, and you can probably speak to this better than I can, but I know that she was telling me about some approaches that have been taken in other regions to meet unmet need or to satisfy agricultural needs. And we can just take a look at what other regions have done that maybe we're not doing, that we could do a little bit better job. But I don't know if you want to speak to that a little more.
Well, that's a great idea. I mean, there are other regions that have these subcommittees. I mean, to be able to get lessons learned from them and see what they're doing. I mean, that's the right way to go, as opposed to let's just do it. What do we do?
And yeah, exactly what you said, Adam. In the past, yes, in the past, we haven't had any sort of, we haven't had any conservation strategies for irrigation-related users, right? So we haven't had any water management strategies for conservation related to irrigation. And I think that it would be beneficial to look at other regions, and Jamie Burke, who's with us here today from Blackman Beach, was the project manager for Region K, and she spearheaded the development of conservation-related strategies for irrigation users associated with Region K. So we definitely have that experience, and we can look at that and look at other regions and how they have developed water conservation strategies for irrigation, and then bring that to a potential work group and determine which route to go. Because, right, I mean, we know that these irrigation users are using conservation methods every day, just to conserve water and save money. And so it would be nice to be able to quantify that savings already and get credit for it, essentially.
So do you anticipate the work group being primarily an outreach focused group?
I would like to see a lot of maybe some technical analysis, looking at specific areas of conservation and maybe specific techniques that are being used, that we could use. But I imagine also outreach would be important.
Well, let me make a couple of comments, and some of this is some of the work the demands work group is undertaking involves this matter of outreach. And so I'm trying to understand how we might be able to fit all the parts together. So recently the demands work group met and reviewed the WUG list. We'll get into that in more detail and some other demands, but it became clear pretty quickly for that to be a fully informed process. Perhaps others need to be involved, right? And in particular, discussions about rural communities, was one of the topics we touched on. So I'm curious to see what your thoughts are, or what the group's thoughts are on potentially having an outreach work group, if you will, and in particular, how do we? I have one concern that perhaps if we're not careful, we focus on irrigation and fail to reach out and incorporate participation by the rural areas that are certainly ag-related, but not irrigation users necessarily. And so vice versa, we'd have to create a work group that focused on rural communities and then fail to address the direct ag and perhaps irrigation use. So I don't know how we would proceed with that. I also have one other caution. The number of work groups we make could become uncontrollable at some point, and we have too many of those too. So
It's an issue of resources too. I mean, everybody, depending on who's going to be on the committees, I mean, we all have other things going on.
Yes, sir.
I'm on this one. I got one. You want me on this one? Okay, well.
One other comment to make quickly, the work group that met last week, I think you'll see from that work group from time to time, we're going to ask other members that aren't, to the extent it's formally part of that work group, but we're going to ask them to participate in our efforts when we get to demands or types of demands that focus on a particular interest group. So manufacturing, you may not serve or want to serve or be able to serve or participate in the entire work group, but when we focus on that, we may ask representatives to participate, all to improve the work of that group. So there'll be some fluidity, I think, to these work groups. And should
Are you saying that with the subcommittee or work groups, there's the opportunity to invite others who don't sit around this table?
Oh, that's
Like, in other words, stakeholder interests that don't necessarily sit here, but are involved in agriculture or?
yes, I hope, I had always assumed, yes, that was understood. I think at least the work group thus far and future ones that I can envision, the purpose is to delve into a particular issue and understand it better. Restricting access is probably counterproductive, so no. Yes, I would, if there's another entity or party that can assist, yeah, sure, why wouldn't we?
That would be focused on the agriculture, not from other organizations or anything like that may have a different perspective.
Well, I mean, I would defer to the work group who they want to invite.
Sure. We have a number of comments. Mr. Persky, real quick, Ms. Black. Mr. Persky, you have?
Yes, I think the outreach for ag, but I also think the outreach for the rural communities and counties is very important. When I got nominated by the Wilson County, the county judge knew a little bit about it, the commissioners didn't know anything about it. My city opposed. I had to explain to the city what Region L even was. I do my outreach for the River Authority in a lot of regions, and they don't have any idea what Region L is. And I know in the Nueces Basin, we have 25 counties. We're gonna have 15 new county judges this year. There's gonna be over 25 new commissioners, not counting city councils and mayors. So this process, I mean, is gonna be new to a lot of people who are gonna be represented. I'm good friends with the county judge in McMullen County, and all 5 counties around him, he's gonna have 5 new county judges on his border that so he's gonna be the statesman for his area, because they're all brand new. So I think that outreach is we have to do a good job of that. One of the things we did, I sit in Kendall's position for Region 13 for the flood planning, is we set up what we talked about last time, but we did these road shows where we actually went to different counties, and we did 4 or 5 counties together, invited the mayors, the judges, and they invited people from their community. And our average meeting, one of those subgroups we had was usually between 30 or 40 people we had come. But the best results is now all of our meetings that we have, we usually get 20 to 30 people from the community to either online or come to the meetings in person to give their input. And it's been, I mean, it's been a fantastic resource. We just had a meeting on legislative for Region 13, and we had 3 of our group members were not voting members. They were from those counties and judges who asked to be part of that process. So we let them be part of the groups and give comments. It was the outreach and feedback we got was amazing.
Excellent.
Maybe we need a committee on public relations.
We need a chair for that.
Well, yeah, I was speaking with Mr. Drusky about this idea, and my concern was primarily satisfying unmet agricultural needs, but as he pointed out, we have a real need to reach out to some of these rural communities about a broad host of issues that we deal with. And at first I didn't want to get lost in the weeds, the agricultural issue, but as he pointed out, it's largely the same people that we're going to need to reach out to, both for agriculture and for these broader regional rural needs. And so it may be kind of counterproductive to separate those issues too much.
Byron,
I'm just going to speak to the respective agricultural concerns. It's my understanding we had a deficit last year in some of our counties, and we're showing deficits up in the next few decades in some other counties within Region L on the agricultural side. And I think it's important that, and for some reason, I got involved late in the process last planning cycle. For some reason, it's been there for a couple of cycles, I think. So I think it's super important that we as a group look into that and delve into that a little tougher this year, a little deeper, and see if we can't find a way to come up with some strategies to satisfy those needs. I'm glad to hear Black and Beach has that expertise on staff now. Maybe you can guide us through that. I believe it's well worth the time of putting a subcommittee together or committee together to look into those interests. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, and I would echo that because, I think not, you know, in addition to outreach, having a committee that can review, there's new technologies coming in all the time. Perhaps, there's also, new, federal funding sources coming online, you know, pretty rapidly lately. So I think it's a really good idea to have a committee like that.
Are there any other comments?
The comment I'd like to make, Mr. Ramos, I think based on what you stated is correct. And the director from Water Development Board, but also what Diane just said about Region P, you know, there is some need. And certainly we want to address those unmet needs with our planning efforts. But also, one of the tasks, and I belong to the Water Demands Work Group, one of the tasks that we really have those numbers out are for the ag numbers. I mean, that would be an opportunity for, I would see both subcommittees kind of joining with your expertise. You're working on this. The numbers aren't due until July 23rd, but July 2023. But also the irrigation numbers are going to be due at the same time. So it'd be an opportunity for you all to take these numbers and start doing the outreach, doing the work behind it, and at some point coming with our work, we can join it, and this is what we come up with, and we'll take your thoughts and work together. So I see this as a benefit for all, and it's needed.
One thing.
Yes, our Sarah administrator position, so the Sarah through its contract would pick up that cost, whatever added cost there might be to.
Part of the scope of our work, for sure, yes. Is that right, Kendall? I mean, we would be there, we take the minutes on the subcommittee meetings, and that's all part of our activity.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So that would be already within your budget?
Yes.
I think that there could be a justification in the budget because it would be considered public outreach, which is under task 10, in terms of the scope between Texas Water Development Board and St. Joseph River Authority, and also between Sarah and Black Beach. However, we generally do a lot of work under the public outreach, and I think those monies are limited as is. And I would be concerned about things like multiple road shows and being able to cover the costs of all of those with that the existing task 10 money. However, and one other thing, I think that the funding, the regional flood planning scope may have actually included those road shows specifically in the contract. So they were kind of a line item paid for. So we don't currently have that in our scope, but that's something that we can certainly discuss more.
Yeah, Lauren, thanks for the clarification. I mean, some of this activity is there depending on how active, how many meetings it might justify, certainly for the consultant. I think our activity will be covered, but it's a good sort of contingency comment that we'll see how active and how much this group wants to do.
Just to build on that, I mean, I nominate Director Jackson and the Water Development Board to maybe look about underwriting those activities because, I mean, the contract is for the activities the way they've always been, if you will. And this is definitely above and beyond. And just looking at the 100,000 acre feet of needs within irrigation in Region L in the current plan, I think you really need to focus on maybe which unmet needs you're going to, because just like the new rules indicate, the infeasibility, I mean, this is only my second round sitting at the table with you guys, but I think there has been a recognition that just not conducting those activities is the best financial feasible option, versus depending on whether it's in you guys' basin and that upper basin, you know, there's not surface water or groundwater really to be had, and then versus if it's a lower basin of the Guadalupe or San Antonio. I think we just need to understand who we're targeting, because again, to qualify for these funds, you can't be an individual, and a lot of these irrigation projects do distill down to an individual. So if they are a public water supply system, kind of going back to outreach, they're already in a database and get communications regarding technical assistance or the, you know, the Texas Rural Water Association, and those types of entities. So I think as we talk about all of these groups, and this definitely does feed into the demand projections group, because I think we have some questions regarding industry and manufacturing as well that could potentially affect this planning cycle that we need to look at as well, you know, in addition to the 200,000 acre feet of needs in municipal. So, I mean, I agree, but I think this falls in terms of public outreach that we may be best served to coordinate with the Water Development Board and their staff and maybe targeting some of these roadshows instead of necessarily just tapping out of our budget with Blackened Beach and Sanctuary.
One of the things I'd like to make a comment on that is, so we started our planning cycle on flood planning. We did, it was not originally funded for the first set of roadshows, and we just put that as part of our budget to do this because we weren't getting a lot of outreach the first 6 months we started this process. And once we did that, our technical consultant said that, yes, they were getting calls from engineering firms and things, but there was their uptake of actual communication and involvement was dramatically higher when they felt like they were actually being involved in the process versus getting a phone call from an engineering company saying we're on this planning group. They don't have this, they don't really get it until they come to the meeting and they think, oh, this is what it's all about. And then they were able to get so much more information, and after fact, they were going back after these projects and getting more research thing. I mean, that relationship that was created was dramatically improved.
Well, just to again echo Director Jackson's comments, this is somewhat of a representative democracy group. We represent entities, so I mean, counties, agriculture, we have the duty in this volunteer role to go out and target and communicate back. I mean, not every county judge gets a seat at the table. You're the voice for them at the table. So just remember that as well. I mean, it's easy for me to say all the river authorities are at the table with me.
Any other comments? Let me offer this. Is there interest in establishing a, perhaps I would describe it as a rural outreach subcommittee whose primary, or at least initial purpose would be to coordinate with interested members, define some sort of plan of action for developing an outreach program, investigating potential costs, sources of funding, and to the extent possible, coordinating with the Texas Water Development Board to see if there is any expertise and or if necessary funding available to support that activity. That seemed like a reasonable approach, and does that address your concerns in the first place?
Some of them, I would like to also make a key part of how this group, personally, I would like to make a key part of how this group starts off is like I was talking earlier, assessing some of what other groups have done and trying to bring in, do a listening session of experts from other regions that can maybe just share with some ideas of what has been successful, and that also might drive some of our efforts.
Okay. So sort of a initial task, investigating what the outreach program might be, maybe some initial task gathering information from other people and entities that have been successful at addressing in particular.
Yes.
Does that sound agreeable to the membership? And if it's agreeable, are the people willing to participate? Okay. Yes, sir.
Just to kind of go in with Adam there too, irrigation is important. You talked about, we don't want to separate rural communities from irrigation. We just maybe highlight rural communities and leave irrigation alone. But in your rural communities, there's a lot of irrigation, but rural communities too depend on the water for those different communities. With the influx of people moving out into rural communities, we're going to see more and more. We have a big area in this region of rural responsibilities. So.
Sure. No, excuse me. I must have been unclear. I didn't mean to. I wasn't thinking this to me would exclude the topic of irrigation, how it applies to, I see that as one sort of major, part of the same topic. Okay, there appears to be interest. Is there any member willing to serve as the chair of this subcommittee?
I nominate Adam.
Adam, you want to take that on?
I'm certainly willing. Travis also raised his hand.
Well,
We have to work together.
yeah, exactly.
Sir, that can also be established during the first work group meeting.
Well, yes, we could, and we've done that with our work, the first work group, but I'd much prefer to establish that chair now.
I would like to, I would maybe do co-chairs where he could be more of a irrigation agricultural, and I could be more of the rural, and we could be working together to form this community.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, could I nominate another gentleman, Russell Wallace? I don't know, he may shoot. He's not here, right? But he represents the underground waters, right? I would like to see him maybe on this committee as well.
Sure. Oh, okay. Membership, right. We'll get membership in just a moment. Yeah. Well, so your meetings are constrained to the Open Meetings Act. You have to have public meetings. If they're going to be hybrid meetings, the chair must be present at the meetings, at public location, etc. So, how you choose to operate the committee, I don't think anyone cares to really get down into that.
If there are co-chairs, could one co-chair be present and satisfied?
We think that's the case.
That might make it another reason to have
Okay.
make it easier, yeah.
So with that, why don't we establish the Rural Community Outreach Subcommittee? Mr. Brewski, Mr. Blonsky will serve as co-chairs. Let's talk about membership at this point. In addition to, yes, sir.
Man, I just, you mentioned Rural Outreach Committee. So it's strictly going to be outreach right now?
Yes, sir. That's right. So maybe some clarification might be useful. We already have a demands work group, so I suspect the two will work together. But hopefully the review of ag demand, for example, will go through the demands work group. To the extent we ever get to the point of dealing with potential water management strategy, that to me seems to be further down the road. Perhaps the charge expands for the group.
Any discussion or any comments from anybody online about this?
Good question. Anyone raise their hand?
Tim, this is Diane Wasenick.
Yes.
I want to volunteer for the committee. I represent the public in my position, and I am following what Region K is doing about the ag situation, and so I kind of would like to attend this meeting as well.
Very fine. Okay, so we're making a list of members on the subcommittee. Diane will add you to that membership. Mr. Davis has been nominated by Mr. Riggs for Lance. Okay, Roland Reeves will serve on the committee as well. Mr. Youngman, gosh, be careful, you have a quorum. There will be a regional meeting. Are there other members that are interested in serving? Well, if it doesn't, no, I'm sorry.
I'm interested in attending.
Right. Well, like I said, I don't think you should be in fear of having a quorum of regional there. Okay, so we have a committee established with membership, unless it's objected to by the committee, we'll understand that committee will be somewhat fluid and cooperate with other committees and maybe even ask other members from the planning group to participate from time to time if it's appropriate. And we'll leave it to the co-chairs to establish your meeting schedule and your agenda.
So just for clarification, the first goal objective is to find out what the other regions are doing and kind of glean a little bit of information from them about how their structure is and how that works. that's the first objection, right?
I think, from my understanding, that's one of them.
Yeah, it sounded like it's maybe twofold. One is, I think agriculture will go down that path, but then also maybe try to strategize and come up with a way to outreach to our rural stakeholders. So sort of two-pronged path.
Perfect, and then an outreach to us to say what you found out.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Any other discussion regarding? Yes, ma'am, Lauren.
I have a question. Okay, so when it comes to outreach for non-rural entities, such as those in these high growth areas along the I-35 corridor, would that be a function of the population and water demands work group should they choose to tackle the outreach component?
Let's cross that bridge when we get to it. I suppose it could be, you know, if the membership wants to tackle that matter. I don't have any strong opinions.
I think what I've seen in the past, and probably you've seen this in the plan, is typically the areas towards 35 are considered rural, typically participating here because you're coming with the wholesalers and they come themselves, so they're pretty much engaged and involved. I think what we're looking at here is stuff, and I don't want to, stuff out west that they changes occur and they're not participating as much as we'd like them. So I think we've got that covered, but again, we'll see as we progress to see these entities that we've identified, which are like 80-something% of the plan, are participating. It's those other 20%, whatever numbers that we need to recruit and give information on.
Is this a time-sensitive question you're asking? Are we running out of time and something that needs to be undertaken immediately?
I don't think so.
Okay. We can visit that topic again later. Okay, if there's no additional discussion regarding subcommittees as a general topic, we'll move forward. Agenda item 9, presentation by technical consultant regarding schedule and draft data.
We need to vote on that.
It's not on the establishment subcommittees, I don't think you have to. Is there a motion to establish the subcommittee? We've got a motion, is there a second?
A second.
There's a second. Any additional discussion? There being none, is there any opposition to the motion passing? Okay, there being none, motion passes.
Okay, you ready? Is everything showing up correctly on the screen? Wonderful. Okay. Thank you guys for having us. I'm Lauren Gonzalez. We have here from Black Beach, Jamie Burke. We also have virtually Alicia Smiley and Katie Snyder. And we'll just jump into this presentation. Our agenda for this particular agenda item is we'll review the schedule. We'll also review the draft data that we've received so far, which includes the municipal water user group list from the Texas Water Development Board, municipal historical data, and water demand projections for livestock, manufacturing, and steam electric. So I believe you guys have seen this. You've seen the schedule before. It generally identifies all of the tasks that we anticipate to be in this 5-year cycle, and we have information such as data releases from the Texas Water Development Board up here in these green flags. And then the red flags represent deadlines such as the technical memorandum, which is due March of 2024. And then the initially prepared plan, which is due March of 2025. And then the final plan in October of 2025. The main things to notice here is that we're in 2022. We've gotten a few data releases. We expect to get more data releases soon. And we're working on task 2. Task 3 we'll start working on later this year. And we're also working on, of course, task 10, this public education or public participation and plan adoption and outreach. Kind of zooming in on 2022, this is our anticipated schedule for this year. Our initial scope has tasks 1, 2A, 2B, 8, and 10. And right now, with this task 2A, the non-municipal water demands projections, we've received the livestock, manufacturing, and steam electric power demand projections, and we expect to review those and provide feedback, not this year, but next year, on into July 2023. The population useful demand projections, we haven't received the actual population municipal water demand projections yet. That's in 2B, and we're expected to get those in February. But we have gotten, as I mentioned, the WUG list, the GPCD, historical population and water use data. Those were released in March of this year, and we have an upcoming deadline of July 29th, 2022 to provide feedback on just the draft WUG list. We'll get into that a little bit more. So this is a summary of the data releases we've received to date. So the draft WUG list and the deadline for the RWPG to review and provide comments on that is July 29th of this year. The historical water user group data and the draft baseline GPCD data, the deadline for reviewing that and providing any comments is in August of 2023. So we've got some time, but of course Texas Water Development Board would appreciate us giving them feedback sooner rather than later. And then we've gotten these water demand projections for livestock, manufacturing, and steam electric, and comments are due back on that in July of next year. And so in the future, we're expecting to get the water demand projections for mining and irrigation. Those should come out sometime in August of 2022, and the deadline for responding to that is in July of next year. Then we'll get the population municipal water demand projections sometime in February or early part of 2023, and we'll provide the feedback on those draft population and water demand projections by August of 2023. So just to kind of orient you to where we are in the planning process. We're gonna dive in on the draft municipal WUG list. This is the main topic, the most important topic for this particular meeting because of that deadline that's coming up in July 2022, because that deadline is just 6 days before our next regional meeting. So this is a QR code if you wish to go to this link for the Texas Water Development Board's municipal data dashboard. And so again, the RWPG's responsibilities are to review this draft list of water user groups and submit revisions such as merges and additions via us, the technical consultant, and it's due to the Texas Water Development Board by July 29th, 2022. We included the official definition of a water user group, just for reference, and it's in your agenda packet if you'd like to refer to it as we discuss these WUGs. So the Texas Water Development Board's methodology for developing the draft WUG list was basically to take all of the 2021 Regional Water Plan water user groups and carry them forward. The new water user groups were evaluated and added based on their utility water use between the time period of 2015 to 2019. If they use more than 100 acre feet per year during that time period, then they were added as a new water user group. There were very limited number of utility-based WUGs that were actually removed. For us, there were none. For us in regional, there were none. So this is a tabular summary of the water draft WUG list revisions that the Texas Water Development Board has proposed. And it includes 2 name changes, so, and they're important but minor changes of the Port O'Connor Mud to the Port O'Connor Improvement District, Crystal Clear Water Supply Corporation, and name change to Crystal Clear SUD. There are a couple of other name changes that that the Population Water Demands Work Group reviewed, and we'll get into those in a later slide in this presentation. But these are just the revisions that were suggested by the Texas Water Development Board. There are 6 new water user groups that were suggested by or proposed by Texas Water Development Board. They're in Comal, Wilson, Uvalde, Medina, and Blanco County. And I say Blanco County for that last one, the Rancho del Lago, because it's actually one of our proposed, the proposed feedback is to not include Rancho del Lago because there's a bit of a mismatch between the Texas Water, between the TCEQ's information and the Public Utility Commission's data and information, and Rancho del Lago is actually not in Region L, they're in Region K. So we'll get into that in another slide. But generally, these new water user groups, they would have come from county other in the last cycle because they did not meet the definition of WUD previously, but they've reached that threshold of water use between 2015 and 2019, so now they do qualify. So just to kind of orient you on that one. So in general, there were 139 municipal water user groups in the 2021, or not municipal, 2020, there were 139 WUGs in the 2021 plan, and now there are 144. And we've shown it here listed and organized by county. And it should be noted that the WUGs that came to us, they were not organized by county, by the board. We applied basically the organization of if there was a WUG that was split between multiple counties, we listed them here multiple times. So I don't want you to look at this and go, wait, we have a CCN in this other county. This is not an official breakdown of the list. We just did this for your convenience. So we've got 5 slides here that show the WUGs by county, and we've identified in colored text which ones have name changes, which ones are new, and which ones are shared with Region K or with Region B. Going into the first new water user group, it's 3009 Water. We've included on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see a map that's showing the CCN boundary, and then this one is located in Medina County. No, I apologize. Can't see it very well. Sorry. They're an investor-owned utility. They reached that threshold of 100 acre-feet per year in 2017, and then they have their draft GPCD, which is based on the 2018 GPCD. The next one is Sea Willow Water. They are also an investor-owned for-profit water system. They reached the threshold of 100 acre-feet per year in 2015, and here's their draft GPCD for 2018. Concan WSC, located in Uvalde County, they reached that threshold for 100 acre-feet per year in 2017, and their draft GPCD is shown here as 244 GPCD. The Three Oaks Water Supply Corporation, they are a water supply corp, so they are a nonprofit located, I'm sorry. They reached that 100 acre-foot per year threshold in 2015. And then the Ville Dalsas Water Supply, they are investor-owned, for-profit, located in Medina County. They reached their 100 acre-foot per year threshold in 2017, and here's their draft GPCD here, 246 GPCD. As I mentioned earlier, the Rancho del Lago was a proposed new water user group for the 2026 plan. The Public Utility Commissioner, the PUC, indicates that they're in Comal County, which would put them into Region L, but looking at their actual boundaries, they're located wholly within Blanco County, which would be Region K. So no part of their water user group is located in Region L. And we've already reached out to the Texas Water Development Board, they looked at it, and they've already updated their data on their on the data dashboard. So it seems as though they're just going to go ahead and make that change, but we will still request the change officially through this process. So moving on to just here the proposed revisions, requesting that Rancho del Lago be removed as a new Region L WUG. The next proposed revision is to change the name from, how can I get that to go away? The top. I can't. Okay. You just can't read my screen here. Okay. the proposed revision would be changing the name of Maxwell WSC to Maxwell SUD, and that's because they converted from a WSC to a SUD in 2020. I reached out to the general manager of Maxwell SUD, and they confirmed that the name should be changed to SUD, but they're just having issues having it updated, basically pushing that information to online databases with the TCEQ and with the Public Utility Commission. So we will recommend that, or request that name change from the Texas Water Development Board. Another potential revision is the Port O'Connor Improvement District. So as you may recall, they changed their name, and that was proposed by the Texas Water Development Board, but there's another minor change here. So LaSalle WCID 1A, they did a consolidation election in 2021 where they would consolidate or merge with Port O'Connor Improvement District. So their data was previously included in the county other. So we're going to work with the Texas Water Development Board to figure out how to represent that so that either their county other population and water demands would be sort of incorporated under the Port O'Connor Improvement District population and water demand projections. So another option is that we might need to request a collective reporting unit and a classification for the Port O'Connor Improvement District and put the definition of the CRU accrue over there on the right-hand side. And that's something we're still exploring right now. So in summary, the proposed feedback on the draft WUG list is to agree with this name change of Port O'Connor Improvement District, agree with the name change for Crystal Clear SUD, and then agree with the addition of 5 of the 6 WUGs, except for Rancho del Lago, where we would request removal, and then request a name change for Maxwell WSC to Maxwell SUD. And we will revisit this proposed feedback as agenda item 10, because agenda item 10 is looking at the recommendations from the Population and Water Demands Work Group. Are there any questions on the draft WUG list?
Lauren, would you, just for the benefit of me and possibly other new members, what's the significance of a WUG being defined and a GPCD value being determined?
Well, we're not necessarily going through the GPCD information
Oh, I understand.
yet.
Okay.
But I think that it can be I think it's sort of an optics issue potentially, because the GPCD is sort of artificially a bit high so that you can take credit for conservation, drought contingency, mainly conservation though, to thereby reduce your GPCD and your water use. So a lot of people, there are typically lots of comments on the GPCD because they look at their data and they look at their numbers, and the GPCD that they know exists is very different from the draft GPCD data that comes in sort of raw here. It also takes into account things like plumbing savings from, well, passive conservation savings from plumbing fixtures. So it's moving targets in a lot of ways. It's good. It's difficult to
being a WUG is significant. Why? Is it?
Well, even if you're not a WUG, you would still be planned for under county other. It's just not so much of a granular, more detailed planning process if you were a WUG. However, if you're not a WUG, as defined in this process, you're still eligible for funding through SWIFT and other Texas Water Development Board funds. So, and you can still have water management strategies.
Strategies can still be proposed, included in the plan, funding assistance sought for those, even if you're not a WUG.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
There was a conscious decision a while back that we changed the threshold, remember, because we wanted to plan specifically for some of these smaller communities. It's probably an optics thing, but I mean, it was a conscious move.
Sure. And the primary distinction between a perhaps a WCID in one of these rural areas that is not enumerated as a WUG and have production in excess of 100 acre feet, so they don't qualify this cycle. If their production were to go up, or their use go up and cross that threshold, then presumably in the next plan, they would show up as a WUG and be treated as such, right?
That's correct.
So,
Yeah, that's true. I mean, just to summarize, the WUGs are the individual entities that get, the specific population identified, specific demands identified, and specific supplies and needs identified, and if there are needs, specific strategies identified. An entity that doesn't meet that threshold and is not named as a WUG is still part of the county other WUG. I mean, county other is a WUG that represents collectively all of the smaller entities within that county. And in your plan, you identify, the supplies used for that county other. You identify the demands of the county other and the needs of that county other, and you also identify any strategies that those entities may be planning for or that you recommend that they plan for. So everybody gets planned for. However, the WUGs are the ones that are specifically identified. The WUGs are also the ones that are individually surveyed in different ways by your consultants during the planning cycle. So there is more feedback from those WUG entities, but everybody gets planned for and everybody is eligible for the lending programs.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to draft municipal historical data. This is another QR code that'll take you to that dashboard that the Texas Water Development Board has developed. And I do have to note, that dashboard is very helpful. It's very easy to navigate, very intuitive, and you can really dive in and look at more granular data for your particular WUG, for your particular, even the steam electric and manufacturing demands. I highly recommend their dashboard. It's helpful. The draft municipal historical data comes from data that's been reported annually between 2010 and 2020. The historical WUG level population estimates were developed by the Texas Water Development Board using 2010 and 2020 census block data. And they include historical calculated gallons per capita per day and new draft baseline GPCDs. So for new water user groups, so those 5 WUGs that we showed, it includes draft GPCD for those new WUGs of the 2018 GPCD is the draft. The 2018 GPCD is the draft baseline GPCD. And that's because in that time period of 2015 to 2019, 2018 was a relatively more dry year. So for existing WUGs, the GPCD that was used was the baseline GPCD from 2021, from the 2021 plan, minus any accumulated passive savings from the plumbing code savings. And so for the most part, those WUGs, their baseline from the 2021 plan were from the 2011 GPCD. Lots of numbers there. Any questions about that? So the responsibilities of the Regional Water Planning Group for the historical data, review that historical data and let Texas Water Development Board know of any revisions. The revisions to the baseline GPCD numbers can be requested as part of the population and municipal demand review, which would be in February, between February 2023 and August 2023. For water user groups, the responsibilities are to review the historical data, and if there are any questions or revisions, contact us, the technical consultant, and we would then coordinate with the population and water demands work group to bring that information forward, and then they would work to sort of synthesize that and provide any recommendations to you all as necessary. All right.
Lauren, we do have a question in the chat. I want to make sure that it gets heard in the hybrid meeting. It's from Melissa Bryant. Do we have an estimate of the increased water usage by new WUGs being added? Would the county other category decrease in quantity usage?
I think we're gonna have to look at that and circle back around to Melissa on that one.
Okay.
Any other questions on the draft municipal historical data? It's a lot of data, so. The next topic to cover is the draft water demands for livestock manufacturing and steam electric power. Again, here's a QR code to that handy dashboard. That was very cool. And so the Regional Water Planning Group responsibilities are to review and submit revisions via us. And then they're due by July of next year. But again, we can submit anytime before then. At this time, I'm going to invite Jamie Burke up to walk us through these draft water demands for the livestock manufacturing and steam electric.
Thanks, Lauren. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, good morning. As Lauren mentioned, we're going to go over the livestock, manufacturing, and steam electric draft demand projections today. She also mentioned that these aren't due as far as revisions and feedback back to the board until next year, July 2023. So we have time today. We're just wanting to introduce them to you. We're going to have more population and water demand work groups discussing these numbers that you'll be invited to participate in, but we'll be bringing that information back to you at future meetings as well. So just wanted to give you some clarification. We're not needing any action from you all today. Just wanted to provide this information to you. So this first slide here is our livestock draft water demand projections. This graph, you can see the red line that's up there is the data from the projections from last cycle. The green line up there are the draft projections for this cycle. And then the black data over there on the left is the historical data. And so for the livestock demand projections, the Texas Water Development Board did use the same methodology for this cycle as they did for last cycle. They developed county water use estimates using the USDA inventory for animals and then multiplying that by livestock water use coefficients to come up with the water use estimates per year. And so the baseline that they used for this cycle was the 5-year average from 2015 to 2019. And compared to last cycle was used the 5-year average from 2010 to 2014. So you can kind of see looking at that historical data, the 2010 to 2014 data is quite a bit higher than the 2015 to 2019 data. So that sort of, you can see that result in the draft projections, this cycle being lower than last cycle. The methodology for how to project those numbers out through 2080 is basically the same as last cycle as well, as kept constant, including carrying it out to 2080. So here we have the water use coefficients that the Water Development Board used to develop the water use numbers. The column on the far right are the water use coefficients that were used for the 2021 plan. And then the column just to the left of that with the orange, some of the orange cells, those are the water use coefficients that were used for this cycle. And the orange cells are where the water use coefficients have changed since last cycle.
Those are changes from USDA?
These are, I believe, are water use coefficients that the board staff reviewed data and updated. I don't know that it's from the USDA. I know the animal inventories are, but I don't know that the water use coefficients are. I would have to check on that though. I think I have that information available if we wanted to look that up after the meeting. And so here we have the draft livestock water demand projections for Region L by county. We've broken it up into 2 slides just to make the numbers a little bit easier to read. And so on this first slide, we have Atascosa County through Gonzales County. That county total at the bottom is the county total. It's not per slide, so just so you're aware. And I would just point your eye to Gonzales County at the bottom because we're going to talk about that county in just a minute. And then here's the second slide with Guadalupe County through Zavala County. So, wanting to just give you some information, we looked at kind of what were the significant changes for these projections since the last cycle and maybe what kind of investigate the reasons behind them a little bit. And so we noticed that really the only significant change to the numbers from last cycle were in Gonzales County. They were the demand projections for livestock for Gonzales County in the 2021 plan was 9,600 acre-feet per year. It's gone down to 4,300 acre-feet per year in the 2026 plan. And so we did make a request to the board staff to see if we could get the animal inventory data for Gonzales County so we could try to understand better like kind of the reasoning for the change. And so this is the table up here is the information we got from the Water Development Board. And you can see from the data that the majority of the animals in Gonzales County are the fed and other cattle and then non-broiler chickens and broiler chickens. And so if you remember from the water use coefficient table, the water use coefficients for these animals really didn't change at all from last cycle to this cycle. So in my mind, that means the reason for the change is the decrease in animals. And so that is just something that we'll want to acknowledge, and maybe as we're working through the work group activities, we'll just want to take that into consideration and see if we think that that animal inventory data is correct, or if we have other information that we might want to look at. And here, I'm not going to read all of this to you, but we just wanted to provide the Water Development Board does have certain criteria for making revision requests. It has to meet certain criteria in order for the board to consider it. And so we just wanted to make that available to you all. Things like if we know of a better water use coefficient and we have evidence for that, or if we have evidence that an animal facility is missing, or if we have evidence that the number of animals in the county is incorrect in some way, we can share that with them. Okay. Sorry, before I move on, was there any questions on the livestock? No? Okay. Let's move on to the manufacturing.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yes.
If the coefficients are the same, then the only possible explanation is that there are fewer chickens and cows anticipated. Is that correct?
Correct. You're correct. That's my interpretation. Yes.
Okay. Well, I'll be anxious to find out what's going on. Thank you.
There's just less, I guess, basically because I don't know if you consider COVID and all the other costs and ranchers and farmers having to sell off stock or get rid of stock to do that type of, to lower their costs. But with the population growth that we're going to have, I kind of see that coming back up.
A lot of it's drought related.
Yeah, exactly.
And they go to fewer animals because they don't have a feed.
Exactly. Just personal opinion.
Great, thank you.
Some of this water usage regarding poultry, does that take into consideration the processing facilities as well?
That's a really good question. I believe it should. If it's a facility, it should incorporate. I know that they also have. So they have the animal inventory. Then they also have additional special facilities such as like fish hatcheries and things like that, that those numbers have been pulled into the demands as well. I don't know for sure if the 0.09 gallons per chicken per day includes any specific facility water use. I don't know if that maybe would that fall under manufacturing perhaps?
I'm not sure. We'll definitely look into that.
That's a good question though. We can kind of try to look into that a little further.
And we're planning to, we'll get to this in, I think, agenda item 10, but with the population and water demands work group, they've decided to go ahead and have specific 3 meetings over the next couple of months, specifically to target and invite stakeholders to talk about livestock for one meeting, and then steam electric for one meeting, and manufacturing. So these are great questions that we will look into and then be able to report back to those folks and to you as well.
Okay, anything else on livestock? Okay. All right, next up is manufacturing. This cycle, there's a bit of a new methodology that the Water Development Board has used to develop the manufacturing projections. They're still using the historical water use survey that they received from facilities. And then they're also using the U.S. Census Bureau county business patterns information to develop their projection numbers. And so just pointing out what's on this graph, the red line are the projections from the 2021 plan. The blue dashed line are the draft projections from this cycle. And then the black over on the far left is the historical data. And so the board for the baseline for the demands, this cycle used the highest county water use between 2015 and 2019, and then added in some unaccounted water use estimates. And kind of, I guess what that means is that they know they don't receive water use surveys from every facility. And so if they're aware of facilities in the county, they kind of add in some additional water use based on what they think those non-responding facilities would use. So that's the baseline number. Then to get the 2030 projection, they take that baseline number and they multiply it by the historical water use survey rate of change from 2010 to 2019. So they've increased that out to 2030. And then going further, 2040 out to 2080, they then take that number and they use the 2010 to 2019 historical number of establishments by the county business patterns, that rate of change to project out 2040 to 2080. So last cycle, they really kept the numbers constant. This cycle, they're projecting kind of an increase through 2080. And so here are the draft projections. Again, we've broken it into 2 slides just to make the numbers a little bit larger. You can see Calhoun County has quite a bit of manufacturing demand. And then also Victoria County has quite a bit as well. And so just to talk a little bit about where we noticed some significant changes since the last cycle, really it was just in Victoria County. And there was a significant increase in the demand since the last cycle. Last cycle it was 9,000 acre feet per year. This cycle it's 33,000 acre feet per year. So we looked into it a little bit, and there's one particular plant, the Invista Sorrel Victoria plant, that for the last planting cycle, it was likely a consumptive use demand that was included, versus this cycle they're using the total intake. And so you can see up here what those changes in the numbers are from the 2021 plan to the 2026 plan. So that's a big reason for the difference. And then in addition, there's a new Equistar Chemicals Victoria plant showing a demand of 8,600 acre feet per year starting in 2019. And really, none of the other counties had any major changes compared to last cycle. Any questions on that? I also, again, wanted to provide the criteria for adjustment that the Water Development Board staff has for making any revision requests for manufacturing demand projections. Things like if we know of a new facility or a facility closing, if there's a wholesale water provider that has just signed a contract with a new manufacturing facility, they know they're gonna have this demand coming up by 2030, we can include that information. And then, anything else such as errors or something that we notice. Those would be reasons for submitting a revision. Any questions on the manufacturing?
I just want to make a statement. One of the things that Mr. Stinson talked about with this work group was that, we need to look at some specific counties here. Concern to us right away were Caldwell County and Hayes County. So at some point those industries out there will be developing out there. Those numbers are low, so we're gonna need everyone's, Mr. Chavez's input on, how do we pursue this? So that's something we need to consider because we know those areas are going to be developed industry.
There is a lot of movement from manufacturers to reshore, if you may, back from different places around the globe in the U.S. But to be quite honest, a lot of them are not using that much water at all. I mean, those that are, the big ones like your HEBs, your Frito-Lays, your Toyotas, they're recycling water, and all that kind of stuff. So I was thinking that maybe it might be the chickens we were talking about, that's what the cost of that, but I don't think so. But I think it's just a good foundation of where things are going. And as our economy improves and our manufacturers and supply chain, which I'm pretty sure that includes that as well, will grow.
So we'll need your expertise once we start revisiting this.
Yes.
Anybody else?
And I would just add that if we don't have any concrete evidence that we can provide to the Water Development Board related to the demand side, there's always the ability to support the wholesale water providers in that area who may be having to sell water to these new facilities by giving, helping them with water management strategies that we have in the plan so that that water can be made available. Okay. And lastly, we have steam electric. So again, the red line are the projections from the last cycle. The gray dashed line is the draft projections for this cycle, and then the black line over on the left is the historical data. And the Water Development Board used the same methodology this cycle as last cycle. They have information from the historical water use surveys, and they also have information from the U.S. Energy Information Administration 860 form, which includes data about proposed new facilities and then what facilities might be closing. So the baseline water use was the highest county water use from 2015 to 2019, plus estimated water use for non-responses and proposed facilities. And so then that number was projected out to 2030 by incorporating any additional new proposed facilities in that form, and then that number was carried constant across out to 2080. And so here again, we're providing the draft projections by county, and we broke it into 2 slides. You can see that Bexar County has basically 75% of the steam electric demand in the region.
Does this projection take into account that many of the renewable energy sources don't use as much water? For example, CPS Energy is having a debate on Spruce One. Would they stay with steam generation or would they go with solar? That could dramatically change their future needs as well as the other counties. So how are we really going to have renewables into this equation?
The board's methodology document does talk a lot about the reasoning behind keeping the projections constant out through 2080. And it does talk about that there's no evidence really that there'll be increased water use in the future, because most new facilities will be at least more water efficient a little bit, if not a lot, and some of these new technologies are using much less water. And so I don't think they're ready to say we're gonna decrease. I think they're comfortable keeping it constant. Did that answer your
Yes.
question?
But I think over time, we ought to, the board ought to
Yes.
revisit that, because it will create a capacity. That
And
could
they-
shift
that was-
population or ag or other things.
Sure, yes, and that was another one of the reasons is that these plans are updated every 5 years, so they get new information. And then, okay, so just wanting to talk a little bit about some of the significant changes since the last cycle. In Bear County, there was some increased net use in 2017 through 2019 at 2 of the CPS energy plants. In addition, the county, some of the sources started adding reuse as a source of water starting in 2015. In Goliad County, the Coleto Creek Power LLC net use jumped by almost 3,500 acre feet from 2018 to 2019. So that increased their demand projection for Goliad County. In Hayes County, last cycle, the Hayes Energy Facility was reported as being in Region K. This cycle, the location the board confirmed is being in Region L. So that has been added to our demands. In Victoria County, the water use for the Victoria Steam Power Station significantly decreased after 2012. So that reduced the demand in Victoria County for this cycle. And then in Wilson County, there was a previously proposed plant that's been canceled. So that decreased the demand in Wilson County. And so again, just the board's criteria for making adjustments to these demand projections. If we want to look at making any revisions, we'll have to try to meet one of these criteria. Just if we're aware of a new facility that's not been included previously in the information, if there's a closure that wasn't identified, any other information, other errors, other water use demands that we may want to give them information about that may be different from what they have. We can do that. Any questions on steam electric? That's all I have for you.
Okay. Let's go. So that concludes agenda item 9, unless you all have any questions.
Are there any questions, comments? Any online? No? Thank you.
Okay.
We'll move to agenda item 10.
Okay.
Discussion appropriate action regarding activities of population and water demand work group related to TWDB graph data. We recently met, I believe it was last week, at that meeting. Mr. Ramos was elected, so to speak, to serve as our chair. So with that being stated, I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Ramos.
I think you have a presentation or?
I mean, I can give the presentation, or you can, whichever you prefer.
Just go ahead and go through the presentation just for the sake of it. But again, once we go down this process, we're going to seek some expertise from some of these stakeholders to help us iron out these water demands and the population projections. Please.
Okay. So the Population and Water Demands Work Group was established at the last meeting in February of 2022. In April, we met for the first time to discuss and establish the responsibilities of the work group and to review the draft data from the Texas Water Development Board. As Chair Andrus mentioned, Mr. Humberto Ramos was elected as chair of this Population and Water Demands Work Group. And they established that the primary responsibility of the work group is to review Texas Water Development Board developed municipal and non-municipal historical data and demand projections and return recommendations to the South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group, Region L, to provide to Texas Water Development Board. And we also, at this meeting in April, we reviewed the draft data releases, identified future activities, and developed recommendations to provide to you, the South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group.
Another future activities that were identified were to survey water user groups for contact information and get their feedback on the historical data. And we have already gotten started and drafted a survey that we anticipate sending out later this month that will essentially reach out to our previous contact list and get updated contact information, names, emails, so forth, and then also request for feedback on that historical data. And this will sort of prime them for the stakeholders for future regular communication so that we can request data or feedback from them on the historical or on the population water demand projections and their water supplies, because that's where we really need accurate information. The future work group meetings will focus, as I mentioned, where we'll have one meeting per non-municipal use type. So we're gonna dive deep into the details of livestock sometime between now and August 2022. We'll have another meeting to dive deeply into manufacturing and another for steam electric. All of those are before August of 2022, so that we can report back to you all at the August 5th meeting. And we, again, the deadline for providing feedback to the Texas Water Development Board isn't until July of next year. So I expect that this will just be an ongoing conversation and discussion that we will be having here at these meetings. We're not focusing on irrigation and mining yet because we don't have that data yet. We'll receive it sometime in August of this year. And so I suspect that we will likely have in-depth meetings, at least on mining, for the population water demands work group. And for these work group meetings, we will invite, of course, the public and all members are welcome to attend because these are public meetings that are, well, they're public meetings and they must meet the Open Meetings Act. So, but we will specifically invite particular work group particular regional water planning group members to attend the meetings relative to their respective interest groups. So we'll reach out to you, Mr. Chavez, for the manufacturing.
I need to ask some questions on that. I'll let you finish, but when you finish, I'll ask a question.
Okay. I think I'm done with that stuff.
Okay. So specifically, when you come and ask the manufacturers, how are things, you're asking to see if their water usage, are they gonna need more water, or, what's gonna be the specific questions that you're gonna ask? And the reason why I say that is because if you wanna know what water consumption is, I'll ask my partner, Mr. Puente, you have the information in regards to water usage for our facilities around the area, except for the civil overshirts, and I'll probably have to go to you guys to ask that. But again, back to, what are the questions going to be, so I can prepare to get those answers for you.
I think first and foremost is, forecasting. What do you see out there as far as growth with new manufacturing locations? We talk about, what I'm hearing in the background is microchips. I'm hearing, large industry manufacturing areas coming up. Obviously, there's Amazon's going up everywhere. So I'm hoping that those are being captured by the Water Development Board. But again, this plan is for the next 5 years. So you would assume maybe it's not coming in, maybe it's information the Water Development Board does not have, maybe something you're privy to, maybe something we do not. And so just kind of taking an overarching look at what may be happening out there. And so that's pretty much it. And certainly the numbers are the numbers, but certainly want to capture those new industries that may be relocated here that we're unaware of.
Gotcha.
And those are those expertise. But certainly anything you may provide will certainly guide us.
Yeah, I won't be able to speak to Amazon, they're not manufacturing. But everybody else, yeah, sure. I understand what you're saying.
And almost anything you come up with, Ray, we've taken into consideration. Any growth that already is out there that we don't even know of, we're pretty much set. So through water supplies and through water conservation, we have a very good situation. We're in a very good situation. Plus, right now, Donovan is in charge of our own 50-year plan in 5-year increments, and we're currently developing it right now for 2022 and the next 5 years. So we'll take all of that into consideration.
I just gave it a go.
Hey, Lauren, I know we've sort of touched on this before, batch plants, concrete batch plants, are they in mining or manufacturing?
So,
How's that captured?
I think it's, if they're aggregates, they're included in mining, right?
I've seen cement plants under manufacturing.
Okay.
But yeah, the aggregates are definitely in mining.
So aggregate is mining, but when they batch it into concrete, where is that?
I think that they're manufacturing.
Good. So aggregate and concrete batching is all mine. I have to answer today, I just, that is a big growth area in the hill country in particular, so.
Okay. We'll flag that as something to delve into more and make that distinction during our future breakout meetings for the population water domains work group. Any other questions? So the population water demands work group met, reviewed this data, and developed a recommendation to the South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group. And if I may, I will just summarize what that recommendation is here. This is the same table as you saw earlier, where we are in agreement with the name changes for Port O'Connor Improvement District and for Crystal Clear Sled, and in agreement on the addition of 5 of the 6 water user groups. And the recommendation is to request removal of Rancho del Lago from Region L as a new WUG, and to also request a name change for Maxwell WSC to Maxwell SUD. And this is sort of the narrative version of that same thing, so that you all may review it and potentially make a motion.
So I guess at this point, I'll ask the committee if they have any comments into this. This is pretty much what we decided as far as our recommendation. You've seen this slide twice. You have the narrative at point and concerning it too. So with that, I'll make the recommendation that based on this slide 52, that'd be a recommendation to the Water Development Board as far as the WUG list.
Steve Graham, I'll make a second.
Very good, we have a motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion on the matter? There being none, is there any opposition to the motion as described there on the screen? Okay. There being no opposition, we'll consider motion passed. About feedback.
Thank you. And that concludes our presentation. Here's our contact information for both Jamie and for me. And if you have any questions about your baseline GPCB members, come to us. Here's our contact info. Thank you.
Mr. Ramos, any additional comments on the committee?
No.
Okay, very good. We'll move on to agenda item 11. Schedule potential agenda items for the next meeting with Region L. I believe that next meeting is scheduled for August 4th, is that correct? Yes, sir. And we'll be able to meet in this room? It's already reserved. Thank you so much, Saul. We very much appreciate that. Of course, the agenda will be developed later. If you have any specific agenda items that you'd like listed, please contact either myself or Ms. Hayes, and we'll take care of that, get it on the agenda as appropriate. Any additional discussion regarding meetings and agenda items, that sort of thing?
Would you remind me of the date of the next meeting?
August 4th, 2022.
Oh, I see it. Thank you.
We'll move to agenda item 12, public comment. Is there anyone at this point participating in the meeting who would like to make public comment? Nothing online? We'll move to adjournment.
One.
Oh, excuse me.
I'm sorry.
One comment.
I was looking for the new business thing. I just want to tell everybody, I've been on the board close to 12 years, and I've enjoyed many things here, and I've learned so many things, and I'm glad I was here today because I want to make that announcement that I am retiring from SAMA. My last day will be June 30th. The new person has not been identified yet, but as soon as we do have that person, I will get with Kendall to see what we need to do to get that person squared away and give them the tasking for are heard, than asking them for what they've got. Just wanted to make that announcement.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, so folks, with that, we'll stand adjourned to the next meeting. Thank you, everyone. Oh,
So moved.
motion. Second.
Second.
Any opposed? Adjourned.
Thank you all.
Amber, did I get my sticker? And, you know, it's